All of our productions at GCTV are sponsored in part by Bay State Health, providing the care you and your family need when you need it, close to home. Visit them online at baystatehealth.org. Greenfield Savings Bank. Visit them at 400 Main Street in Greenfield. Call them at 774-3191 or go online to greenfieldsavings.com. Greenfield Community College, providing access and excellence in higher education in the Pioneer Valley. Visit them at gcc.mass.edu. The Hammond Family. The Hammond family are longtime supporters of Greenfield Community Television. New Fortune Chinese Restaurant on the Mohawk Trail in Greenfield. Visit them online at newfortunema.com. Call them at 772-0838 and check them out on Facebook. Real Cleaning Services, cleaning Hampshire and Franklin County since 1972. We don't cut corners, we clean them. Check them out online at realclean.com. Call them at 413-422-1143. People's United Bank, located at 45 Federal Street in Greenfield. You can call them at 774-3713 or visit them online at peoples.com. The Solar Store of Greenfield, replacing fossil fuels and nuclear power one home at a time. Visit them at 23 Fisk Ave. Call them at 413-772-3122 or visit them online at solarstoreofgreenfield.com. Thank you to our sponsors for supporting all of GCTV's productions.
We welcome Katie Korby from Real Pickles. As you probably know, it's a worker-owned cooperative located in Greenfield. And she's going to introduce us to basic pickling and fermentation and hopefully give us a little history about her company that she works for. And I just wanted to say that recently Real Pickles was recognized at the Good Food Awards in San Francisco for 2 of their products, the organic garlic dill pickles, and one of my personal favorites, the organic garlic kraut. Congratulations. So, it's now on to you. Welcome. Yep.
Hello, everybody. My name is Katie. I am a worker owner at Real Pickles and also the fermentation manager. So this is what I get to do all day on a much bigger scale.
Could you speak louder, please?
Sure. First, before I start, I'd love to go around the room real quick and just get a sense of everybody's familiarity with fermentation. If you've tried it before, if you've never done it before, anything like that. Just maybe really quick, name and a quick brief sentence about your exposure to fermentation.
I'm Dodie. I've done it twice, and the first time it was great, it worked fine. The second time, it didn't work out very well at all.
Okay.
That's all I've had experience.
I'm Marcy. I've made a bunch of dill pickles, but other than that, I haven't tried anything else.
John, I made some kvass for a while. Other than that, I've had a lot of Real Pickles products.
Jeremy, and I don't have any experience in fermentation.
Kathy, I don't have any real experience in fermentation. I do my own kombucha though, so that's kind of some kind of bacteria growth.
I'm Jim, and no experience doing this.
I'm Becky. I've done a couple of batches of red cabbage slaw and done some kombucha and yogurt.
So I've my name is Emma. I've experimented a few times with mixed results.
My name is Paul. I'm in the past, I didn't do any of this stuff. In the past, I made beer and wine, so I'm pretty familiar with the fermentation process that way. And plus, I made a few rolls of bread, so I'm really familiar with yeast and hardwoods and everything. I had a grandfather, some 50 or more, probably close to 60 years old. He made fantastic dill pickles, really great dill pickles. I don't know if he used a vinegar bath to do them or not, but they were just fantastic. They weren't real soury, they were just had a real mild, nice, mellow taste, and I don't know how to do it.
My name's Mark. I've tried it a couple times, have not had a lot of success.
My name's Lena, and I've done lacto-fermented vegetables also a few times with mixed results. Want to learn more?
My name is Valdina, and my husband Rob is the one who makes the pickles and the sauerkraut. So I love them, but I don't make them myself.
I feel so guilty since I used to buy so many of your products, and now I've been making my own sauerkraut for years. And I was working in cookbook public relations for a while, and I learned the secret to the Second Avenue deli making pickles. So I can make some really damn good kosher pickles.
I'm Emily, and I have no experience whatsoever.
All right, great, good range. Well, fermentation there's evidence that dates back to 6000 BC that people were fermenting either beverages or food, vegetables to preserve the food. Almost every culture in the world has some traditional fermented food. Originally, we believe it was for preservation. So, you know, a cabbage is a good storage crop. It will keep for a little while. Turning it into something like sauerkraut, it's going to keep a lot longer, and you get all these additional health benefits as well. So, so there's a lot of good, a lot of really interesting history of food preservation with fermentation, along with health benefits and also flavor too. So it's not, and yeah, so food preservation, safety of food, and some really good health benefits. The really basic idea of lacto-fermentation, which is different than kombucha or sourdough or beer or wine, dairy. This is sort of its own category of fermentation. So what we're doing, the basic idea of it is we're creating a good environment for the good bacteria, the lactobacilli that are already on the vegetables, they're on our hands, they're in the soil and the air. We're creating a good environment for these bacteria to thrive and then to convert sugars and other things into lactic acid and some other types of acids, which preserves the food. So what these lactic acid bacteria like is a salty environment, and they need some liquid to move around, and they want to be warm for at least a couple of days so they can really get active. And you're going to start, what I'll do today is demonstrate really quickly how to do a really basic sauerkraut style ferment, which would be considered a dry salting, and I'll show that in a little bit. And then I'll also show how easy it is to do a brined product like carrot sticks, or I started some cauliflower this morning. It's just chunks of cauliflower in a brine, so I'll show you how to do that too. So what we're going to start with is good quality vegetables. Hello, welcome. Hi. There's some worksheets over there. Oh, hand out and help yourself. So you want to start with a good quality vegetable. Organic vegetables are going to have a higher bacteria count, a good lactic acid bacteria count on them than conventional vegetables. That being said, you know, I do know people who ferment with conventional vegetables and it works fine for them. So I have found that you get a little bit of a better result with using organic vegetables. Fresh is better because they're going to have more living lactic acid bacteria on them. So if you can get things fresh, grown as close by as possible so that they are fresh and organic if possible. You're gonna start with a good amount of lactic acid bacteria to get your ferment really going quickly. The other thing you're gonna need is salt, non-iodized salt. So pickling salt, kosher salt, sea salt, the Himalayan pink salt I know a lot of people use. Any of those are totally fine. Iodine is antibacterial, so you don't want to use iodine. It'll kill all the bacteria. So you need a good salt, and that's pretty much it. So in your handout, you'll see that there's some like basic worksheets on developing your own recipes, and you don't need to look at that now, but that's like a good guideline. So you need your vegetables and some salt and herbs and spices if you want them, anything like that, and some really basic equipment. So what you see here is really all that you need for a really basic setup. Scale, some bowls, cutting board, knife, and jars is really all you need. There's a lot of really cool, specific fermentation, like home fermenting stuff out there now, equipment. You can get special lids that vent, off of the mason jar. You can get beautiful crocks. You can really use anything that you can seal up pretty well. If you just have mason jars, works totally fine. I'm doing some experiments at work right now, and that's how I'm doing my first round of experiments, is just in our regular jars with a lid on them. So you don't need anything particularly fancy to do this, which is nice. So for the cabbage, maybe I'll just start by demonstrating. So if you're gonna do, start with just a small batch. The reason I chose a pint jar is that it's, if you can remember that a pint's a pound whirled around, so a pound of cabbage or other shredded vegetables is gonna fit in this jar. And then you have a really easy way to math out what you're gonna need for this jar. It doesn't look like it's gonna fit, but it does. So a pint's a pound whirled around. So a pound of vegetables, shredded or cut, kind of however you want. And then a teaspoon and a half of salt mixed in with those vegetables. And you mix them together and you stuff it in this jar as tight as you can, put a lid on it, and put it in a warm place, is really the basics of it. So I'll start. So I started some cabbage and salt about an hour ago. And you'll be able to see really how much the salt will start to break down the cabbage and suck all the juice out of it, and it'll be much easier to get that all into the jar once the salt has had some time to work on it. So the basic recipe that I'm gonna do is just gonna be cabbage and salt. Just very boring. It doesn't taste like much of anything. But it's a really easy way to demonstrate. So I could take that 1 pound measurement and divide it up kind of however I wanted to. If I wanted to have it be half shredded carrots and half cabbage, then I'd just do 8 ounces of each of those. If I wanted to add onions or carrot or anything, hot peppers, anything like that. All I'm doing is taking that 1 pound of vegetable and just dividing it up into whatever different.
You actually do something like onions, just onions alone, and certain things you can't do alone?
Good question. Yeah, so onions are a special case. Pretty much every vegetable out there has lactic acid bacteria on it already. Onions do not. So you can ferment them. It takes a really long time and they're gonna smell pretty funky. They're gonna taste really good, but they're gonna smell very odd, very sulfury. But if you add in onions to other vegetables that ferment really well, like cucumbers and cabbage, anything like that, the lactic acid bacteria on the other vegetables are going to help the onions along, and you won't get that funky sulfur smell, and they'll ferment a lot better. But in general, onions are a little bit of a funny case, but mostly you can kind of pick whatever you want to put to ferment. Some things are going to do better than others, and that's one of the fun things about experimenting. You know, we were like, oh, maybe asparagus would be really good. It's not. It's pretty appalling. but it's fun to find out like what's gonna ferment really nicely and take up the flavors and the sourness, and what's just not gonna work at all.
Katie, is it important to not wash your organic local produce because you want to maximize the lactobacilli, or
That's a good question.
Like if you wash and scrub like the the surface of the carrots, for instance, are you like washing them all away and then the fermentation will take much longer?
No, so cabbage, I'm not gonna wash the cabbage. I just peeled like a couple of layers off the outside of it just to find the nice stuff. The carrots, what we do, we like wash our carrots in a big sink, just like kind of swishing them by hand. We don't use like you don't want to use like soaps or anything like that on it. But if you just like scrub the dirt off or anything like that, that's totally fine. Yeah, and even a little bit of dirt is fine too. It's alright to eat a little bit of dirt. But yeah, I wouldn't want to use any sort of like soap or bleach or anything like that on it, because that is definitely going to kill everything. And you can, chopping size, not a big deal. If you like really crunchy kraut, you could leave vegetables in chunks like this, or like these chunks of cauliflower. If you like it to be a softer texture, then you're going to want to slice it a little bit thinner. I find that if you have a Cuisinart with with one of those slicing blade attachments, that's like a little on the thick side, but it'll work. So that's an easy thing too. If you're just gonna run cabbage through, you can just use your Cuisinart slicing blade, and that works really well. Or for carrots, like what we do, the shredded carrots, same thing. You can just run it through your grater blade, and that works really well. So I have my pound of cabbage, or whatever mix of vegetables that you want. And I'm gonna add 1.5 teaspoons of salt. And I'm gonna mix it really well with my hand. So you can see the difference. This stuff is really crunchy and really fills the bowl quite a bit more. You can kind of squeeze it as you mix it, but you don't really have to. The really beneficial thing that you can do is let this sit for 10 or 15 minutes. And then the salt is really going to start to draw the water out and start to break down the vegetables into something that's like this. And you can see like there's already liquid in there. So this is perfect. This is going to be really nice to get into that jar, and it's going to have some brine starting already from the water being drawn out of the vegetables.
So what you have in the second bowl is already fermented some, but the first bowl, it was as big as the first bowl.
Yeah, so this started out like this, the same amount of weight, but just letting it sit for that much time. And this sat for an hour, but 10 or 15 minutes is totally fine. And it's just you're gonna get some nice brine in there that is gonna help the bacteria move around, and it's just gonna be easier to get into the jar. Yeah. Any questions?
You're not gonna add any water to that then?
I am not at this point. I might when I get it into the jar. If I pack that into the jar and it seems dry and there's no liquid on top, I'm gonna add a little bit of water to it, just to like help it along. Yeah.
What would adding a splash of vinegar do?
It would kill all the lactic acid bacteria.
Okay.
Acetic acid vinegar is gonna, because this is so new, like the bacteria haven't really started their thing yet. And if you introduced acetic acid, if you introduce vinegar to this right now, they're just gonna die, the lactic acid bacteria. Yeah. Yeah.
So after you do that, you're gonna pack the jar.
Mhm.
Now, do you pack it really, really tight if it's got shredded? And then you fill to how much liquid above the surface? So the few times that I've tried lactic acid fermentation with cucumbers, what ended up happening is half my batch completely got ruined because a tiny teensy bit of cucumber was above the surface, and it all became covered in like this fuzz layer of happy mold. It was disgusting. Everything looked yucky. So
Yeah.
I feel like it needs to get weighed down, and somehow all the vegetables need to be below the brine level. Is that correct? Am I getting that?
Yeah, so that brine level, here I'll start packing into the jar and you can see, that brine on top of your kraut or cucumber pickles or whatever is gonna help protect the ferment from molds or yeasts and stuff like that coming in, is that layer of liquid on top. So yeah, if you have something like poking out, particularly cucumber pickles are pretty finicky, then yeast and molds are just going to land right on that tiny top of the pickle and just go everywhere. But if you can keep, so like with cucumber pickles, that's a nice easy thing to weigh down. You can put, if you're doing them in a crock, they often come with stone weights or wooden weights. I've used plates before in my crocks. You can buy little inserts for mason jars that you can put underneath the lid that hold them down.
What are those called?
Pardon?
What are those called? Wait.
I just use smaller mason jars.
Yeah.
Instead of larger ones.
Yeah.
You fill them with water.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can make, one thing that I do sometimes when I'm scaling up experiment recipes, what I'll do is do it in like a 5-gallon bucket, and then you can use, I often use a couple of 2-gallon Ziploc bags filled with water, and they create a nice seal and a weight, both on top of the bucket. I don't know that it would work very well for this, but if you had maybe a wide mouth mason jar that's like a quart or bigger, you could probably get a little Ziploc filled with water, and like double bag it, and so that it doesn't leak into your kraut. But and that creates often enough of a weight, particularly if you're doing cucumber pickles, because it doesn't take a lot to weigh down a cucumber pickle or like a carrot stick. It takes a lot more to weigh down the sauerkraut type of things. So I'm just pushing it pretty hard. You want it to be easy for the lactic acid bacteria to move around, and so by packing it in really tightly, you're making it, not only are you getting all the air out, which is important, but you're also just making it that much easier for the little bacteria to move around.
So you're saying it doesn't need a lot of airspace in there to do its job?
No, and actually the least amount of airspace is going to be your best bet.
Really?
You're going to want a little bit of airspace because it's going to produce CO2 and start to expand and get bubbly. And in a minute I'll open some of those jars, which are probably going to bubble all over the place. But there's enough. So this cabbage was like juicy enough. It made its own brine. I can, you know, push down all the solid bits down into the liquid, and that's gonna be totally good. If this cabbage, sometimes we get cabbage or carrots don't have a ton of water in them. There's some other vegetables that are a little drier. If I found that as I pushed this down and it had sat for a little while, if there was no liquid coming up onto the top, I would just add a little bit. You don't even have to measure it or anything, just get some like, and it doesn't have to be distilled or anything, but as long as there's not chlorine in your water or anything else funky like that, then you can just use, you know, tap water or spring water. So then I might just add like a tiny, tiny bit of water, helps it go along. You don't need to, it's such a small amount of water, you don't have to worry about measuring it or weighing it or anything like that.
I can't really see, but in the directions they said to leave like 3/4 of an inch above it. Is that pretty much?
Yeah, that's a little high, but this top lip of a mason jar is about that. Too much airspace is going to mean that there's more oxygen in there, means there's going to be the potential for yeast and other things to get in there. So less headspace is definitely better. If you're using crocks that don't seal like a jar would with a lid on it, they often, so what I do at home with my like 2-gallon crocks is I'll put, you know, the plate on it with a weight, and then I try and cover it as best I can. We're trying to keep oxygen out as much as possible. That being said, I wouldn't worry too much about a little bit of oxygen, particularly if you're using a crock that's hard to seal. So we put our salted cabbage into the jar, put the lid on decently snug, and I'm going to want to sit this in a warmish place. 68 to 72 is ideal. 64, okay. Anything above 72, 73, you might get some funny flavors, and it's going to ferment really fast. Cooler temperatures, it'll ferment slower. And you get different flavors with each of those things. I know some companies who specifically ferment at a lower temperature because they like that flavor. And on the opposite end, they'll ferment at a higher temperature because they like those flavors and textures too. So you can see what you like. My house is usually pretty cold, so I have a hard time in the winter making things ferment. But yeah, and if you can keep it for at least 3 or 4 days at that good, happy temperature range, then within 24 hours, most likely you're gonna start to see it bubble. And you're gonna wanna burp the jars because, and probably put like a tray or something underneath. So I keep all my little experiments in a tub because they will leak out despite my burping them. So, actually I'll show you. So you want them, so what you're looking for is a good active fermentation. So this is just some cabbage and salt that I started on Sunday. So it's just a couple days old. And I did burp it this morning, but we'll see what happens. So if you heard that, there was a little hiss. And it's starting to bubble up a little bit. So maybe once or twice a day, I'm gonna go check my jars of whatever I've started. And I'm looking for the nice bubbles coming up. You probably can't see, but they're sort of coming up the side. And you can see that it's really expanded in there from the CO2 getting released. And all I'm gonna do is just push the kraut back down under the brine. And it's gonna help get some of that CO2 out too. So that's the kind of thing that you're gonna see, is that like nice, bubbly, active fermentation.
They don't have to be in the dark or anything when they're fermenting, right?
Not particularly. There's some, I wouldn't put them in like direct sunlight,
Yeah.
but if just in your house, in the kitchen or whatever is, yeah, totally fine.
So Katie, what's the difference between like it becoming carbonated and going to fermentation?
If you tried this right now, it would probably taste carbonated. And particularly kimchi is often fermented for a very short amount of time and often has that sort of effervescent taste in your mouth because it's not fermented for very long. So if you tasted this in like another day or two, and you're like, oh, I really like that, you could stop it there at that stage of fermentation. If you let it go a little bit longer, the lactic acid bacteria are going to change throughout the fermentation, and you're going to get different populations that do different things. So the first population of bacteria that are going to start the fermentation produce a ton of CO2, and the later ones produce very little. So if you can move past that first week or two, then a lot of that CO2 is just going to dissipate out, and you'll start to get these other populations of bacteria that are producing other flavors, and they're eating different things, and a lot of that like carbonated taste and feel is just gonna disappear.
And you stop the process by putting it in the fridge?
Yeah.
You chill it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so people ask me, well, how do I know when it's done?
Right.
As long as you've had a good, vigorous 3 or 4 days of fermentation where you see the bubbles, where you see it expand, then you know that the pH has dropped, it's more acidic, it's safe to eat. And at that point, after usually about a week, then you can start tasting it, and you can decide when you like it and when you want it to be done.
Wait, so do you taste it after a week or after the 3 to 4 days of?
I would taste it after a week. It also kind of depends on what you're making. If you're making a jar of cucumber pickles and there's like 5 cucumbers in there, like you don't want to necessarily take out like a whole cucumber to taste, because it's gonna disrupt it more than if you just took out a bite of cabbage.
So it's unsafe to taste it if it's under those 7 days?
Most likely.
Unhealthy?
No, I mean,
you
know, I know
people. Are you
people.
gonna have gastrointestinal upset or something?
No.
Because I've bought commercial lacto-fermented vegetables that were way too sour, and I feel like the producers made them, not yours, I'm not, but other companies, I feel like they let them sit for way too long, and they were so sour, my teeth hurt. Like, I get sensitive teeth, so I want to make sure I don't overdo it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I like tasting a little bit at a time to be like, oh, that's my
yeah.
Can I do that, or is it? Like,
you can. Yep.
Not good to taste before the 7 days.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the teeth hurting. That is actually a young ferment, because you're getting these acids that haven't progressed out of the fermentation yet.
Really?
So I could really get into this. Part of my job is getting to taste every barrel of stuff that we make and deciding whether it's done or not, which is really fun. But one of the things that I've learned is that the flavor is going to change dramatically over days, weeks, months of the fermentation. And often in the middle of how long we like to ferment our krauts for, which is a minimum of 3 months. So I don't usually even taste anything until it's been in the barrel for 3 months. And then I'm gonna start, I mean, granted, we're doing huge volume. I wouldn't let these little guys go for 3 months. But there's a phase in the middle of our fermentation process that has a really sour, and my teeth hurt too when I eat it at that stage. And if you let it go a little bit further than that, actually, it's gonna like mellow out, and you're gonna get a much more melded flavor. But like I said, that's not gonna be 3 months for something like this.
Why is that? Why does the quantity matter about the speed?
We get in our barrels, I think just the volume makes the fermentation just a little bit different. I'm not entirely sure why.
Somehow I got the impression that you weren't supposed to use a metal lid, like until it was done, you put it in the fridge. I thought like you just put a cloth and a rubber band.
No, better to have a lid.
A metal lid?
Whatever kind of lid you have. These will rust eventually, but they're totally fine to use.
Is a plastic lid fine too?
Yeah.
Like getting plastic ones?
Yep.
Your products that are in the store, are there some, when you put them out for sale that way, is there something added in it at that point that stops any more fermentation?
Nope.
No?
Just the temperature is gonna stop it, pretty much. So yeah, so you've, I'll backtrack a little bit. So you've had your jars going for a week, they've been really bubbly and vigorous, and you've been burping them every day and pushing the solids down into the brine. And once they've stopped that initial really vigorous fermentation is about when you can start trying it to see if you like it or not. I would recommend, if it's a shredded vegetable product, you're probably gonna want it to go at least 2 weeks before you really start trying it. It's gonna take a little while for the lactic acid bacteria to really break down the cell walls in something as tough as like cabbage or carrots or turnips or anything like that, beets.
And all the while, it's still in a warm place.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you want to keep it in that steady, warm place until you've decided that it's done. And then you can stick it in the fridge or your cellar, place it to freeze.
I'm just curious, like you said that jar that I bought was like maybe under fermented because it's so sour. Can you restart the lacto-fermentation process by taking that refrigerated jar out of the fridge into a warm place and like leave it there? And will it like continue doing? Because
maybe
it will, because the bacteria just go dormant. It's not like they die.
They do die.
They do die.
Eventually they die.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
How long does it take for them to die? I'm curious. Because like if it's a fresh batch.
Yeah.
So it should restart.
So the actually it's really interesting. We just started doing some research with UMass, and they are doing bacteria counts for us for some of our products so that we can really see what the populations do over time. It's not super predictable so far, but within that first week you're going to get really high population numbers of what people know now as probiotics. And then they're going to fluctuate, and they're going to, the diversity is going to change a little bit over time. And then once you have stopped the fermentation and you stick it in a cold place, they do go dormant for a while. But after a number of months, the population is going to start to crash.
So if you want
like
the maximum
over a year or something like that.
benefit, you have to eat it within a couple of months. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, so like I said, I would recommend probably 2 weeks that you're gonna wanna leave a shredded vegetable thing out. Something that's brined, like cauliflower, takes, in my experience, takes less time. And with something like cauliflower, I personally like it when it's still got a little bit of a crunch. You don't want it to be like totally mush, which it will eventually turn to if you leave it too long. But yeah, you can start checking it, and when you say, okay, I really like this, then you can stick it in your fridge, and it's gonna basically stop the fermentation, and it'll keep for quite a while. A couple things to look out for once you've, after that initial vigorous fermentation, is signs of yeast or mold on there. Yeast is going to discolor, and it's going to start from the top of the jar, and it's going to work its way down, and it'll turn the top like brownish or gray colored, and hopefully it's going to take a little while, like a month or something, for that to show up. But if you start to see some discoloration on the top of your cabbage, you can just scoop it off and push it back down into the brine and let it keep going if you've decided that it's not done. And that's totally fine.
So it's harmless.
It depends on who you ask. Some people don't think that yeast is harmless. But you're not going to get sick from it. It's just going to taste funny.
I was wondering about corn. You know, due to the high sugar content in corn, what effect does sugar have on this process?
I've never fermented corn, and I've never had lacto-fermented corn before, so I'm not sure what that would do. But with something like beets or carrots that have a lot of sugar in them, you might get a slightly more vigorous fermentation in the beginning, but it's not gonna be dramatically different than cabbage. Yeah. Yeah, our beets, I would say we get a more vigorous initial fermentation, but it chills out pretty quickly and ends up being really similar in the long term to cabbage. Yeah, and then so yeah, yeast. If you leave it for a really long time, there's a risk of getting molds. There's one type of yeast that's called KAHM, K-A-H-M, and it's like a white pancakey kind of thing. Totally harmless. It's a little bit bitter. That often shows up on brined products. So something like the cauliflower, you might see like little white specks or like a white pancakey thing floating on top. It's totally harmless. You can just scoop that off. It's a form of yeast, and the rest of it should be fine. Stuff I just tell people to look out for is like fuzzy molds. You don't want to mess with different colored molds. You don't want to mess with, but that's something that's going to happen like if you leave it in your fridge for a year, or if you forget about it in your cellar for too long, then you're going to find some funky things growing. But in general, if you get that really good initial fermentation, then it's acidic, it's outcompeted any other funky bacteria that might be in there, and it's going to be safe to eat.
With the mold, no, with a good initial, with the mold and stuff, that'd be a non-issue if you had that good initial fermentation.
It would eventually, months or a year down the line.
By then you'd have eaten it.
Yeah, hopefully you'd have eaten it by then. But I do find fun things in the back of my refrigerator. I forgot about.
Is it possible to do this with fruit, plums, for example?
Yep. Yeah, Umagoshi plums are a lactic acid fermented plum. Fruits can be a little bit tricky because of the sugar, and they don't have as much lactic acid bacteria on them as vegetables tend to, but you can for sure still.
But if you, like with carrots, if you, no, it wasn't carrots, it was something else. If you mix them in with something like cabbage, onions, what you said about. If you mixed chopped or diced or shredded fruits in with cabbage or shredded carrots or something, would that ferment well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, cabbage and apple is really good. Fruit, I find, has a harder time, especially something like an apple, has a hard time getting the flavor out. It's hard to really taste the apple, I found. And it can get that like carbonated sort of texture in your mouth too, because there is so much sugar, and it can kind of get trapped into in the actual apple. But I've done ferments with like lemon zest, that's really good, plums, apples, cranberries, blueberries. And I've never tried them on their own, although I know people who have. But in with other vegetables, it's really good.
So if you're going to use plums, do you have to peel them, or you just, how do
You can just use them whole, and put them whole into a jar. Actually, that's a good segue. I can show how to do a brine product too. So it would be something like plums or preserved lemons you can do this way. This is one of my favorite things to do. I have a big garden and I often end up with like ridiculous amounts of green beans or radishes or salad turnips or something like that. And green beans are my favorite and it's what my daughter will eat. So I will just get on my giant bowl of extra green beans, put some garlic and dill in the bottom of the jar, fill it filled with beans, and then I'm gonna just add the salt water. So with this, it's even easier. You don't have to weigh it. You just wanna fill your jar with whatever chunks of vegetables that you wanna put in there. Herbs and spices, fresh herbs, garlic, anything like that. You can just shove it all in a jar. And then the same rules about salt amounts apply. So I'm gonna do so there's gonna be 1.5 teaspoons of salt in here, dissolved in water. And the easiest way to do that is to measure out get enough water that you know it's gonna all fit into the jar. So I know that amount of water is gonna fit in there. And I'm gonna add my 1.5 teaspoons of salt and dissolve that really well. And then whatever, I'll pour all that in. And then I'm just gonna top it off with water. So I know that 1.5 teaspoons of salt is in there. And all the water that I need. Shake it up a little bit more, and that will start to ferment.
And how long would you, before you eat those?
Carrots, I would probably wait at least a week.
Same with green beans?
Yeah, green beans. When I do green beans at home, it's about a week. And because I like them really crunchy, and so it's about a week for that. And same kind of rules. I'm gonna hope, I purposely cut these carrots so that it would fit in this jar, but you for sure don't want anything that's like gonna stick up above the brine, because you're gonna get the molds and yeast and stuff in there. Although it'll take probably a week for that to happen. And yeah, whatever other things I wanted in there, I could have put some whole cloves of garlic or some fresh dill in there, and that's gonna be ready to go. It's gonna be the same kind of situation as the cabbage. You're gonna wanna burp it. It's gonna wanna be in the warm place. If sometimes, let's see if one of these I can get to do it. So sometimes you have a really active fermentation and you're gonna open this and it's just gonna go spraying everywhere like champagne. And you're gonna push the solids down and you say, oh my gosh, there's no liquid left in here. Like where did my brine just exploded everywhere. You can add a tiny bit, like a tablespoon or 2 of water. To like top it off a little bit, and that's not going to mess with your ratios too much of salt. But yeah, they're gonna. When I opened these this morning, they went everywhere.
Is there use whole garlic or like chunky?
You can use whole garlic or minced garlic, or for my dilly beans, I tend to use whole garlic, but that's just of laziness maybe, or it's just easy to plop a whole clove in each of the jars that I'm doing.
What about the nutritional value of the veggies themselves? Like, so for instance, if a vegetable contains a certain profile of vitamins, minerals, whatever, is this process reduce that, or is it still, you're still getting like the biggest bang for your buck of like fresh vegetable nutrient matter?
Yeah, not only does it not reduce, it actually increases. So like particularly with cabbage, I don't remember the numbers exactly, but vitamin C, there's some amount of vitamin C in the cabbage. Fermenting it makes a whole bunch more of that more available to your body to use. So you're actually getting, not only getting the health benefits from the probiotics, but you're getting more out of the vegetables that your body can actually use.
And does that have anything to do with like phytates and other compounds in the vegetables that you either want to cook out or you want to, I don't know, just like.
You're talking about like with green beans, and there's a couple Swiss chard, I think.
A lot of vegetables have phytates in them.
Yeah, there's not a ton of research on that. From what I've read, fermentation does take care of that. So like for instance, not phytates, but like cassava root, in order, it has cyanide in it, can't just eat it raw. It has to be fermented, and the fermentation destroys the cyanide that's in there and makes it safe to eat. So yeah, another cool thing that fermentation does.
What if like in the summer you're trying to do this and the room temperature is like 80 degrees or more in your house because you don't have air conditioning? And will the ferment still take place? Or is it going to ruin the ferment, or what will happen?
Yeah, 80 degrees is pretty warm. It will still ferment, and it'll ferment quickly.
Yeah.
And you're just going to get slightly different flavors
So
from
it's
it.
not going to harm it. You will still get a.
Probably not. Yeah, you're probably still fine. It might just taste a little bit different than if you fermented it at 68 degrees. No, but there is the risk. I mean, it is going to ferment faster, so so there is the potential. Like if you left it for a couple of weeks at 80 degrees, there's a higher risk of yeasts and molds developing, just because everything happens faster when it's hot out. Yeah.
Katie, what is your experience been with like fermenting starchy root vegetables? For instance, like say sweet potato or squashes, butternut squash. Like I never see those available on the market as fermented. So I'm just wondering, is there a reason why?
They get a little funny when you ferment them. I've done butternut squash before, and yeah, it's been one of the few like really polarizing experiments that I've done at Real Pickles. Some people loved it, and some people were appalled by it. I thought it was pretty good. If you know, it doesn't, because it is so starchy and so fibrous. I found that I needed to really find the right cut that made the texture good. Like I really liked it shredded, and I didn't like it cubed. It got like just a funny texture when it was. So experimenting with different shapes and sizes of vegetables can make a really big difference. We're doing some small batch products, and we did a Hawkeye turnip, so those like fresh white salad turnips that are really good that you find in the spring. We tried slicing them, and they just like dissolved into nothing after a couple of days. It was just like total mush in the whole jar. So we tried, you know, doing little like apple wedge sized slices, and that worked way better. Texture was way better. They didn't turn to mush. They kept their nice crunch. So there are definitely some vegetables that you'll have to experiment with the shapes and sizes that you cut them into.
Have you experimented with horseradish?
I have, yeah.
How does that go?
It's okay. It definitely, It's tricky to handle fresh in any sort of bigger volume, but if you were doing it at home, it wouldn't be as caustic. But yeah, it fermented fine. There was some research done in like the 60s, I think, that horseradish could help keep cucumber pickles crunchy and not get soft. And so we were trying some, and also help reduce yeast and molds and stuff growing. But in the experiments I did, it didn't seem to have that effect, and the flavor didn't come through quite as much as I expected it to. But I also didn't use a ton of it. But I've definitely had other products with it in it too.
And did you shred that sort of similar to cabbage, or grate it?
I think I grated it. Yeah. But you really can. It's super fun to just if you have a garden, just experiment with it at whatever extra veggies you have hanging around. You can try, like, I bought a jar of dried sumac, and I'm trying some sumac experiments. Yeah, so I think it's fun to get creative with fermentation, because you can really come up with some interesting flavors and things that you will like. You know, the point of this is to make things that you're going to eat and enjoy. So, yeah.
Can you talk about the storage a little bit? Like it says put it in cold storage and then the refrigerator. Like how cold is cold storage, and does it have to go in the refrigerator? Because you could fill a whole refrigerator with stuff, you know?
Yeah. As long as it's below 50, it's gonna slow to basically no activity, and it'll pretty much stop fermenting under 50 degrees. So yeah, if you have room in your fridge, I do not have room in my fridge. Yeah. My cellar it keeps pretty consistent, like 45 degrees. So if I don't have space, I just stick stuff down there, and it's totally fine. Yeah. Yeah.
Katie, I was wondering about like the different spices, like seeds, cumin, dill, but not. Like when I look at your products, they're really nice and pure. Like there's no, you know, I've tried the ones I have tried making. Like I've gotten seeds stuck in my mouth where it's a little hard and hard to bite on. Like the texture isn't as fun. I like the smoothness. So but to get all those interesting notes of the spices, it's nice to add them in there. So do you like put the spices in and then you somehow siphon them out? Like how do you do it? Or do you like all of those have zero dill or caraway or anything in there?
Our sauerkraut has seeds, dill seed, like whole dill seeds, whole caraway seeds in there. There's not a ton of them, so you don't encounter them as much, I think. But they're in there, and they do soften over time. The beets, those beets have dried rosemary, which is like got some serious texture to it, and I often don't notice the rosemary in the beets. But most of our other stuff is pureed. Our ginger is pureed, our turmeric is pureed. We mince our garlic. Hot peppers are pureed. So, but yeah, you can, if you want to make traditional sauerkraut with the dill and caraway flavor, you can use powdered. You might have to like mess with the amounts that you put in there, but you can certainly use powdered spices. Like our hot sauce has powdered cumin in it instead of whole cumin seeds, and that works fine too.
Wait, so when you say you puree like ginger or turmeric, would you basically add water to the ginger in your blender or Vitamix or whatever? You get this puree and then you massage it with the salt into, like, say, the carrots, if I want gingered carrots. So I would just massage that, and it would all be kind of crazy mushy, and pack that down, and there would be like the brine would be be like all gingery and they would be floating on the surface, I imagine, and that wouldn't invite yeast.
The like
the
bits of
ginger water, yeah, the bits of the pureed ginger.
Yeah. It's
I
hard to
wonder if I want to do that.
say. For us, we have the machinery to just like throw whole pans of ginger into a machine and it just purees it into nothing, and it's kind of a miracle. It's one of my favorite machines that we have. But if I was doing, so say I wanted to make my own kimchi, and I wanted ginger and garlic and hot peppers in it, which is pretty much what we put in ours. I would probably end up mincing, really finely mincing all of those things. If I couldn't, yeah, because if you're gonna put a chunk of fresh ginger into your blender, well, you might break your blender, but you're gonna get a lot of fiber-y parts to it.
Yeah.
So like microplaning ginger would probably work really well, or just mincing it really finely is gonna have its
Would grating it work?
Yeah, grating it.
So is it also the case, like you said earlier, that you use organic vegetables? Would you use organic, if you're going to use ginger or other spices, would you want to use organic?
Yeah,
those things too?
you can find it. I would say it might be less important for something that's such a small percentage of your overall weight, because if you're doing ginger carrots, like your carrots are really what's going to carry a lot of the lactic acid bacteria, and that's what's going to really drive your fermentation, not the like teaspoon of ginger that's going to go in there. Yeah. And I don't think that there would be, with ginger, you're going to peel it, excuse me, so, any residual chemicals that might be on the outside, you're going to take a bunch of that away from peeling it. So I don't imagine that it would harm the overall fermentation at all if you didn't have, we're getting questions.
Do you have to peel it?
No, but the skin's not going to break down very well. I mean, we don't peel our ginger because that would be crazy, but the machine we have is just like takes it down to a pure puree, which is amazing. So, yeah. But yeah, you could totally leave it on if you don't care about the skin. And if you're grating it or microplaning it or mincing it really fine, you're probably not going to notice the skin on it.
So what you're saying, just be as simple as you want and it's okay. So,
yeah. Yeah, pretty much. As long as you have like the basic good conditions of salt and temperature and good vegetables, most likely gonna work, and it'll ferment really well. But what I was saying, so yeah, if I was gonna make kimchi, I would, have my whatever I wanted: cabbage, napa, bok choy, green cabbage, anything like that in there. I would have my fresh garlic and ginger and hot peppers, and I would be mixing that all together really, really well with the salt. I think we use cayenne too in our kimchi, powdered cayenne, so anything like that. If you like traditional kimchi, you can put fish sauce in there. It's not going to hurt it. That is really good. And you're gonna mix everything like that really, really well with the spices and all of that, and put that into the jar. Same thing with our ginger carrots. It's shredded carrots, salt, and ginger, and we mix that really, really well and pack it into the barrels.
Yeah, it looks like that cabbage has kind of gone down in volume just a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And there's liquid in there, so that was, maybe 15 minutes or something. And this is a pretty thick cut cabbage too. If I cut it finer, it would happen a lot quicker too. So,
wow.
Yeah.
But you don't go
Yes.
through that like with carrots. I mean, it's not gonna change that much if you put the carrots in a bowl like that and sprinkle some salt on it. It's not gonna draw liquid out of the carrot.
Yeah, with anything that I'm gonna do brine like this, it's not, you don't need to mix anything unless you had a spice mix that you maybe wanted to pre-mix. You could mix that separately and add, but I would just, you know, if I was gonna put, I don't know, fennel seeds in here, like I'm just gonna put them in the bottom of the jar, put the carrots in and the saltwater brine. You don't need to do any mixing like that. The salt water is gonna distribute everything really, really well, rather than my hands distributing the salt and the spices really well with the cabbage. Yeah, it's really a lot of fun. You know, I went to the store this morning and saw some nice cauliflower, and this has a thyme spice mix in it, so it's sesame seeds and thyme and cumin and coriander. And I just chopped up some cauliflower florets. This will probably be done in a week. And yeah, we'll see how it tastes. I would say one of the nice things, you know, there's pluses and minuses to the different containers that you use. So with these, it's nice because you have such a small commitment. Like if this turns out to be gross, you don't have like 2 gallons of it that you're like, oh, why did I do that? The downside to something like this is if it does get yeasty or moldy, it's just gonna run through the whole thing really quick, and then you don't have anything that's good to eat. So when I start experiments, I always start with these little guys and work my way up. And for real pickles too, this is how we start all of our experiments on our different products, is we start with little jars to see if we like it, and then we move up in volume. And so some people don't like to ferment in little containers because as soon as it gets yeasty, you'll see it'll just like discolor all the way down, and then there's nothing really good to eat. So you can always scale up. There's some good like guidelines about developing your own recipes. And for sizes like pint jars and quart jars, the like 1.5 teaspoons of salt for a pint jar or a tablespoon of salt for a quart jar, that works really well. Once you start getting into bigger volumes, you're gonna wanna use percentages of salt, which we don't have to get into really good detail, but if you want, you know, to fill your big 2-gallon crock, you're gonna need pounds of vegetables, not just 1 pound. And you're gonna wanna do a salt percentage of that weight. So say you had 10 pounds of vegetables that you were putting into a crock, you'd want your overall salt content to be 1.5% of the 10 pounds of vegetables. So you don't wanna keep scaling. If you wanna scale up to a big crock of some little jar that you made, and you're like, oh, I really like this, I wanna make a big batch of it, don't just multiply this by like 10 or something like that. You're gonna get a really salty product. But yeah, that's if you're doing bigger volumes, anything bigger than like a quart or a half gallon. You're gonna want to start to use percentages of salt instead.
Did you guys put out any books on this that you can buy?
There are a lot of books out there. We don't personally, but I think at the bottom of this handout there's a handful of books that are good resources. There's starting to be more and more people are really getting into home scale fermentation, and there's more and more books out there and they're great. Hot sauce is becoming fermented hot sauce is becoming really popular. That's another really fun one to make. My husband every year grows ridiculous amounts of hot pepper plants that only he eats. And he brings me giant bowls of all these different hot peppers, and I just slice everything and I pack it into a gallon jar or I mix it with some salt and some cilantro and garlic, and I pack it in a jar and just let that ferment. And he's got, when it's done in a couple weeks, I puree the whole thing and stick it in the fridge, and he has hot sauce for the year. Like that's super fun. And it's never the same twice because I don't know what he grows, but it's all these different hot peppers. So that's another really fun thing to experiment with. And I know that there are some new books out there with just about fermenting hot sauce, which is really fun. People are doing like carrot hot sauce. Yeah, you can make hot sauce with a carrot base or beets or anything like that. So that's a lot of fun too. If you're into hot sauces.
So can you run through the process of making kvass?
Yeah, that's a complicated one. There's a lot of different definitions for kvass. So traditional kvass was like bread and raisins, old rye bread and raisins. Yeah. So what we make of our kvass is basically just the juice from making beets. So the way that we make our beets is we slice them with cabbages and onions. We mix it with the dried rosemary, and then it goes into a barrel of saltwater brine. So this is a brine product for us. And then we let that ferment for any number of months. And then when we pack it into jars, we separate out in the barrel the liquid and the solid. And the solids are weighed out a certain amount per jar. And then we have all this brine that's left over. That's kvass. And we have way more than we need for the jars. So that extra kvass is what we bottle and sell as kvass.
Yeah. And so what happens with the onions, the beets, and whatever else you said?
Cabbage.
The cabbage. After you draw off the kvass, what happens with the solid?
Well, the solids get packed into a jar.
Oh,
so
okay.
Our beet jars are like basically half and half by weight solids, and then we just fill it up with the brine. But we have, for every barrel, we have an extra 10 to 15 gallons of the brine. And people really wanted to drink it. So we started selling it, and people love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is one way of making kvass. And there are other people who do like carrot kvass. I know a company does, they have their brine carrots, and it's the same situation. They have all this kvass, all this brine left over that they sell as kvass. I've tried it with golden beets, like the yellow beets fermented with ginger, and that kvass is beautiful, beautifully golden yellow color. Yeah, so you can kind of do it. I mean, we sell our pickle brine, the brine from our cucumber pickles. Anybody doing road races or bike races, people buy it all the time because it's like Gatorade, basically. It's really, really good for you if you're, exercising or like exerting yourself.
A lot of salt.
It's like it's good electrolytes. Yeah. So we sell that. Like all of the brine is totally drinkable for all of these products, and often it's just as good. Or some people will not eat beets but love the kvass. So yeah, and there's other products of ours where people really like to buy just the brine. There's just the leftover brine from the product. Which is just as good. We did a small batch escabeche, which was carrots and onions and jalapenos and oregano, and that brine was outrageously good. Really, really good. Yeah.
All of our productions at GCTV are sponsored in part by Bay State Health, providing the care you and your family need when you need it close to home. Visit them online at baystatehealth.org. Greenfield Savings Bank. Visit them at 400 Main Street in Greenfield. Call them at 774-3191 or go online to greenfieldsavings.com. Greenfield Community College, providing access and excellence in higher education in the Pioneer Valley. Visit them at gcc.mass.edu. The Hammond Family. The Hammond family are longtime supporters of Greenfield Community Television. New Fortune Chinese Restaurant on the Mohawk Trail in Greenfield. Visit them online at newfortunema.com. Call them at 772-0838 and check them out on Facebook. Real Cleaning Services, cleaning Hampshire and Franklin County since 1972. We don't cut corners, we clean them. Check them out online at realclean.com. Call them at 413-422-1143. People's United Bank, located at 45 Federal Street in Greenfield. You can call them at 774-3713 or visit them online at peoples.com. The Solar Store of Greenfield, replacing fossil fuels and nuclear power one home at a time. Visit them at 23 Fisk Ave. Call them at 413-772-3122 or visit them online at solarstoreofgreenfield.com. Thank you to our sponsors for supporting all of GCTV's productions.